So in good Star Trek fashion, this episode is all about two types of science coming together. Science and biology. And also in true Star Trek fashion, it finds it very, very sexy. Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well, and welcome to my review of the latest episode of Star Trek Lower Decks, Season 5, Episode 6 of Gods and Angles. I honestly am really upset that we are already halfway over with this season. We're in the back half of the season, and frankly, I'm just depressed because I love the show so dang much, and episodes like this really do remind me why. Because staying spoiler-free up front, and we'll get into spoilers in just a minute, this episode was not one of my personal favorites. I think this was just a really solid episode of Lower Decks. Probably not my favorite of the season so far, but the reason why I say why I love this show so much from episodes like this, even though I think it's kind of like it's a good solid episode, is just that, you know, I miss solid episodes of Star Trek shows where it's just like, yeah, it's just a fun time with your favorite characters. And at the same time, too, this episode just has a message that I think just showcases again how Lower Decks, as I've repeatedly been saying it in all of my reviews this season, just Lower Decks just really understands the core of Star Trek. And it also understands its characters and how to use its characters and their journeys over multiple seasons and how we've seen them grow as people to highlight what Starfleet, the Federation, and Star Trek as just a series that we are watching in our modern era should mean. And what I mean by that is that this episode really is focusing a lot on Mariner and where she is at now 5 seasons in. This is an episode that you could not have gotten with Mariner way back in season 1, 2, 3, or even 4. It has to be at this point in her character arc. And it's her sort of taking on that mentorship role in a way that like she tried to do back in season 1 with Boimler, to try and teach Boimler to buck the system. Buck back against what Starfleet tries to teach you when Boimler is so like grounded in the rules of Starfleet. But now she is someone who kind of believes more in the system and still has that rebellious nature in her, but in a way that, you know, upholds what she values, and Starfleet sort of finding a way to incorporate her abilities into itself instead of just them resisting each other in every single way. And Mariner having to learn to do that same growth for someone else, but also having to learn that it's not always the same arc for every person, and she can't expect her arc to be the same for everyone else. And I thought that was just a really smart storyline here. So while I found the actual storyline itself to be, you know, I don't think it's that bad by any means. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of it. I think it's a solid story. I overall just really love the message of this episode and what Lower Decks has to say. And there is also some fun play on some standard Star Trekian tropes within this one. There's also a fun Boimler subplot here. I thought it was the weaker of the two in terms of plot and character stuff, but it did have some very funny lines and visual gags that just had me rolling with laughter this episode that I just absolutely adored. So overall, a solid episode, one I really love the message of, a great episode for this specific spot in Lower Decks, you know, arc and its characters, but one that it didn't knock it out of the park in terms of like its ideas or concepts or you know, plot or humor, but just a really good episode of Lower Decks. And I honestly think we need more Star Trek episodes where it's not all about like, yeah, being the best ever. It's like, this is you know what this is? This is the episode that, like, if I just want to kick back and it's just relax with an episode of Lower Decks, this would be an episode I would just put on, because it'd be like, oh, it's just some time having fun with my favorite characters. And you know, I miss Star Trek episodes like that. We don't get them as much, and I love Lower Decks for it. Anyways, let us get into the spoiler section. Let's go full on talking about the episode. Just getting some critiques and things. We start off the episode with a first officer's log from Ransom, and we get to learn that there are the cubes and the spheres on the ship. And they hate each other and make fun of each other. I love this idea. It's kind of like a deep deconstruction of like a regular Star Trek trope, but the most overt version of this was The Lonely Among Us, which was a season 1 Star Trek The Next Generation episode where we had a reptilian and a sort of cat-like species on the Enterprise that absolutely hated each other's guts and needed to be kept away from each other. It was a similar setup in that episode, and here this is just bringing it down to its core level of like, there are circles and there are squares and they hate each other, just bringing it down to the very, very basics of that. And the amount of just humor we get out of that alone, just the like radius jokes and cube and angle jokes throughout the entire episode was funny. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but personally, one of my favorites was when Mariner is going into the gym, and there was the one sphere leaving and looked naked because it wasn't glowing, which is also funny in some. But Mariner saying something like, "Oh, you're really putting in Radius Day" or whatever it was. That was just very, very funny. There's a whole bunch of them. There's a whole slew of them. They're all fantastic. I am always here for the dumb puns, and this episode delivered them in. I wanted to say spades, but now I was trying to think of a pun before it came to me, before I got to the end of that sentence, and it didn't. So there was no pun there. I'm clever. Moving on. The only aspect of that opening that I didn't love, it is not even like a big critique. It was just weird because we get Ransom sort of ending on, like, I have a problem too, and then we meet Cadet Ollie. We don't even learn her name really. We just see her like putting a bunch of circular stuff on the back of a truck or whatever, and her causing chaos when she touches it, which we later learn the real reason for is that she electrically messes with stuff. But it felt weird, like the officer's log from Ransom felt incomplete. Like I wanted him to say something like I'm dealing with an ensign. I don't know. It just felt like it just sort of left trailing a little bit. And that's weird. I don't know. Again, this is like the nittiest of nitpicks. I'm not hating on it. It was just like, it just felt there was no button on his log. That just felt strange to me. But we do come back for the break, and he starts complaining to Captain Freeman, and Mariner overhears, and she learns about Ollie, and Mariner sort of takes it on her own auspices to sort of want to mentor Ollie and sort of show her the way, like she sort of learned the way in Starfleet, thinking that Ollie is sort of like her, sort of bucking back against the system and things like that, and sort of presuming that's her problem as well. And I really love Ransom being the one to suggest, like, maybe you let Mariner do it. Maybe sometimes they just need a good officer to help them along, because that's what Ransom did for Mariner. And I love that, he sort of sees that, like, even though he's complaining about Ollie, he's the one to suggest it, because he's the one that understands, like, maybe this is Mariner taking on that role that I was for her last season. And I thought that was a beautiful, like, exchange, just a subtle exchange of the passing of the baton between the two of them. It was just a very subtle moment, but one I think spoke wonders to Ransom as a character and his place within Mariner's arc. So I loved that. And then we only get a little bit of T'Lyn this episode, where she comes in and sees Mariner at the bunk. Always great to see T'Lyn. Sadly, we're not getting as much of her this season. I don't think she was in the last episode or the episode before, I think people noted. Love T'Lyn. I'm sad that we're not seeing as much for her. We'd get at least like maybe an episode for her in the last 4. Would be nice. I don't know if we will get that, but perhaps. So little wanting for T'Lyn here. But she does have some like jokes about nostalgia and things like that. And then obviously Ollie comes in and messes. I love the beam that she makes, and obviously we get another hint towards the fact that it's her powers that are causing electrical mishaps and not her ineptitude as an engineer, which is what one would assume is the problem going on there. But then they go to the quarters of the diplomat's child that they were supposed to babysit, and they find some stuff on the wall in a crime scene. And I love the fact that we eventually learn that is some cube splooge. That's some cube sperm on that wall there. Got some what's I'm trying to think of, like, see, the puns aren't coming to me. There's got to be so many like puns for cube sperm that I could have easily come up with, and I can't come up with one. Man, I'm disappointed in myself. Please put some cube sperm puns down in the comments. I don't know why I'm asking for this, but do it. Please do it for me. Anywho, we continue on, and basically, like, we get Ollie playing bad cop to Mariner's good cop and going way too far with all of that. But I like the one circle that they do interrogate sort of says, I was just trying to break the propaganda. I think the cubes are weird, but I want an end to hostilities. Like, I like that idea that he's like, yeah, they're weird, but I'm not against them completely. And Ollie going too far. And eventually kind of sparking off a war between the cubes and the spheres, because two of their children are missing. And by accusing him of murder, the one sphere of murder, Ollie has sort of set off this fight. And we eventually get to reveal the fact that Ollie sort of hid the computer that they were looking for because she didn't want people to discover her powers. And again, this kind of goes to the overall message of the episode, because the arc goes on, and like initially Mariner tries to get her to use her powers to be able to solve this problem, but then eventually she actually solves it with her engineering powers and saves the day that way. And I really liked that arc overall because, first off, it's again Mariner trying to be a mentor to her, but not seeing what Ollie really needed, because she thought that Ollie was just trying to buck the system just like Mariner was, like people weren't seeing her and were in that way. But Ollie really is just she wants to be an engineer, but no one's seeing that aspect of her. All they are seeing is the rebel that they want to see based on sort of like what they presume of her. And two, once her abilities are discovered, even Mariner kind of does this and says, oh, you should use your abilities, use your innate trait as that species. And at the end of the day, it's actually not that. It's what she chooses to be. It's not her biology. It's not how people view her. It's her choosing her own path. And this is a problem that I think sometimes Star Trek of all stripes kind of gets into. It gets the first one most of the time of like, don't presume what someone is, let them sort of choose their own selves. But sometimes it does have a sort of fetishistic view of people's racialized or biological traits. Like, for example, people like in Next Generation sort of talking about Spock's logicness as like sort of fetishizing him as like a model minority Vulcan, of like he's using his logic to really help the Federation. The story of Spock goes deeper than that, but that is an element of the original series that is there. You could even argue, though I think Deep Space Nine deconstructs this a little bit more, but you could even argue, for example, that like Nog in Deep Space Nine, a lot of people sort of racialize his Ferengi hearing and sort of say like, oh, use your Ferengi hearing, Nog, and sort of like Nog sort of tries to live up to this idea of like, I can be like the model minority Ferengi, and sort of like really utilize that aspect of who I am. And not to say that you shouldn't use like traits of yourself and all that stuff and know your biology and things like that, but what Starfleet should be about. And I think Deep Space Nine deconstructs that too. So don't want to leave that on the table, but just an example. But I think what Starfleet should be about is like enabling what you want to do. I think Strange New Worlds is the Star Trek show that I think has the biggest issue with this, especially when it comes to some of Spock's storylines in season 2, especially of Strange New Worlds. And looks to be season 3 based on the clip that they released at Comic-Con this year. But I think Lower Decks really understands this, and I loved that it was like, yeah, like she shouldn't have to hide her powers and be embarrassed by it and be embarrassed about the fact that she's a demigod, which loved that, by the way. Loved the reference to that part, demigod. Incidentally enough, this is a sidetrack real quick. Star Trek Lower Decks just released a Choose Your Own Adventure comic book. It's fantastic. You should read it. If you have not read it, you should go out of your way to. It's really wonderful, just filled with a ton of really fun references and jokes. And actually has a fun twist on the Choose Your Own Adventure formula that I did not expect. Like the way they handle that aspect of the book, really fun, really clever. Please go check it out. But in that comic book, they do have a couple panels where they also bring back a different version of one of the demigods from the original series in a very clever way as well. So if you have not read that comic, I'd highly recommend it. But overall, it's great. But it was just a weird coincidence that I just read that comic like a week or two ago when it came out, and they also had a demigod character that looked very similar to how they drew this character. So I just thought that was very funny. But yeah, the idea that like your racialized traits, your biological traits aren't necessarily the only way that you can you should find your diversity within Starfleet. It's about choosing your own path. And yes, your background, your culture, your heritage, your biology can be part of that, but it is not the sole part of that. And Lower Decks nails that. So loved all of that. Loved that storyline. I love the end of this Mariner sort of getting that and understanding that she needs to, as a mentor, enable who the person is, not what she expects them to be, even if she's trying to be helpful. And then her ending up in the brig anyways, and Mariner staying with her and getting to know her despite her not wanting it. Again, just a great arc for Mariner and where she is and showing her growth, and yet that she still has things that she can grow into as well. So just great balance of that arc for her. On the flip side here, we also have Boimler trying to get to be besties with T'Ana. I love the joke of both Tendi and Rutherford don't recognize that the alternate universe pad is red. They don't notice that part, but they know that the bevel's bigger. Love my little nerdy dorks. Rutherford and Tendi never change. I adore you so much. But yeah, Boimler is kind of the flip side of the storyline with Mariner, right? Because Boimler ultimately learns in this story that like he shouldn't be himself. He should follow the path set by other people. And I think the show is being very clear. Like Tendi at the end of the episode is like, no, that's not the lesson you should learn. I think the show is like, again, we're sort of setting this arc up for like Boimler's been having this arc the whole season of trying to emulate this other person, this other version of himself. I think it's a slight... I'm curious to see where they're going to go with it, because I like that this episode does not end with him learning the correct lesson. But I'm curious to see where they're going to go with it, because it does. They even call it out in this episode a little bit, where he's trying to emulate, other commanders before, and he's not learning to be himself. That's been an arc he's had. Now he's emulating himself, but like this version of himself that he should be. And I think the show can do something different with that. I hope it's not just a repetition of his previous arcs, but I think this idea of like, oh, there's this ideal version that you have to be. That you'll never live up to, I think is the correct way to go about it. So I think they really need to nail that home of like, hey, this is an idealized version of Boimler that he can't be, because even that idealized version wasn't perfect. Hopefully they nail that in there as well. But like that version does not exist and can't ever exist. It's who you are and trying to live up to those ideals. I think that's where the show is ultimately going. It doesn't showcase in this episode. It's part of that season-long arc for Boimler, but I think that is where it's going. To talk about some of the specific gags, though, I've sort of talking arcs here. I love the gag. Like, there's so many good ones in here, but my two favorites were when all the different medicine lands on Boimler, and there's just the one that like hypo sprays him as well. Like sprays him with the mist. I mean, hilarious. Died at that. I also love it when he starts swearing at Dr. Ta'ana and she's like, what the hell did you call me? And just starts scratching the shit out of him. Hilarious. But I think my favorite bit is just the fact that his nickname is Fucko. That just killed me. It's like, you got a nickname, Fucko. I nearly died. It's funny. It's so fucking funny. Love that. So yeah, that was it's a solid storyline. The other elements of this, I love also the joke where they become the big cube and the big sphere, and Ransom's like, oh, they're performing any shapes. It could be anything. Oh, I guess they don't have an imagination. They just the big cube and sphere. That was really good. And also when we got Spherin coming in, and like the Romeo and Juliet of the two sides coming together to stop the warring of the houses sort of thing at the end there, and it pooping out a pyramid was also funny. Also, I can't believe I believe the Sun Cube, the one that like had the baby, it sounded like it was voiced by Jack Quaid. Putting on a voice. I couldn't place the sphere, but it sounded like the cube was Jack Quaid. I couldn't tell from the credits. So maybe that'll come out after the fact. I'm recording this review before the episodes come out because I got a screener. So I don't know if that's the case or not. It might be, but it did sound like it was Jack Quaid. So hopefully we'll learn that fact. But beyond all of that, this is, like I said, solid episode of the show. I really liked it a lot. I thought there's a lot of depth here in terms of the character arcs. I thought the jokes were really solid. Like I said, but it didn't knock it out of the park and like being, when I say that, I'm like, it's not like, oh my God, this is like Weege Dooge level, but it's just a solid, fun episode of Lower Decks. And again, that's not a negative. That's like, I want episodes like this. These are comfy episodes. I think we need more comfy episodes. It's not, every episode shouldn't just be a comfy episode, but I want them. And this is just a really good, comfy episode of Lower Decks. And frankly, being very clear, given the way the world is right now, a little bit of comfy is not a bad thing. All right, well, everybody, I hope you're all taking care of yourselves, finding joy in this moment, getting ready to have energy, because we're going to need energy to fight and do many other things. But also remember that there is a future worth fighting for, and stuff like Lower Decks in this time is a show that reminds me that there is kindness, there is caring, there is community, there is a future worth fighting for. And that's why I love it so much. And I think we need shows like this now more than ever, which is partially why I'm sad that it's ending, because, you know, it may seem like a frivolous Star Trek show. Sorry, I'm grandstanding a little bit here, but it may seem, this show means a lot to me. It's been a rough few weeks. And shows like this they really do mean a ton, even though they may seem frivolous. So yeah. And I know, I know some of you who work on Lower Decks sometimes watch my reviews. Just want you to know, adore you, love you. Thank you for making something very meaningful. You kick ass. Never stop kicking ass. And to the rest of you, the same thing. I adore you all. Live long and prosper.